Welcome back to another Raiders game preview. In week 2, the Raiders will be on the road again, this time traveling east to Baltimore to take on the Ravens. As always, we'll be going over the depth charts and matchups to watch for on both sides of the ball. Also in these previews, we talk a little bit about coaching and scheme, so make sure you stick around for that. I do these previews every week, so if you have any suggestions or anything that you'd like to see added to this series, please let me know in the comments. If you've been watching my content, please consider subscribing to the channel, and most importantly, enjoy the video. The Raiders and Ravens have had some good matchups in previous years, playing in some close games, most recently the overtime thriller in week 1 of the 2021 season. For anyone that's new, I'll explain my key for grading these players. Players can be anywhere from a 0 to 100 on the grading scale. Over on the left you can see that scale. First category is elite. This is the top players in the league. You can think of this as a 90 to a 100 on that rating scale. Next is star players. These players aren't quite elite, maybe not top 5 at the position, but still huge difference makers. These players would be an 80 to an 89 on that scale. Next we have solid players in green. These are players that aren't necessarily stars, but players that are good enough that the team most likely considers this position as solid, and one they are not looking to replace. This would be a 70 to a 79 on that scale. Then we have average players. This one's pretty self-explanatory. These are players that are league average for the position. GMs probably consider this position as not a top need, but one they would upgrade from if given the chance. These players would be a 60 to a 69 on that grading scale. Last we have poor players. These players have a recent history of performing poorly and will probably be replaced in the offseason if they don't pick up their play. These players would be below a 60 on that rating scale. I grade these players on how I see them now, and these grades change throughout the season. For example, I will definitely be downgrading some of these offensive linemen if they play anything like they did in week 1. On the Ravens side of things, I could see upgrading Odafe Oweh to star if he continues to play like he did last year, or a guy like Travis Jones if he continues to develop. These are just some examples. Any player on any team can move up or down based on how they play, so nothing is set in stone. Now with that out of the way, let's get into some of the matchups I'll be looking at in this game. The biggest matchup that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on is how the Raiders' interior offensive line fares against the Ravens' stacked interior defensive line. Nnamdi Madubuike might not be the world's best interior run defender, but he was an absolute dominant pass rusher last season. He had 77 pressures, which ranked only behind Aaron Donald and Chris Jones. That's some pretty good company to be in. I have him as an elite player because of his ability to affect the quarterback and give offensive coordinators fits. Whatever Madubuike lacks in terms of run defense is most definitely made up for by Michael Pierce. Pierce has been known as an elite run defender throughout his career, and 2023 was no different. He had 26 run stops, which was one of the best marks in the entire NFL. For as good as Pierce is, he was actually outsnapped by Travis Jones against the Chiefs in week 1. Jones played well against the run, and it was impressive how he was able to push the pocket from a one technique position. The Chiefs' interior offensive line is one of the strengths of their team, which makes it even more impressive that Jones played so well. He's one of my breakout players to watch this season. On the Raiders side of this matchup, there isn't a whole lot to talk about. Cody Whitehair was pretty awful in week 1, which isn't a surprise as he hasn't been decent since like 2020. The sooner the Raiders can get Jackson Powers-Johnson back into the spot, the better. Andre James started to show some upside last season and looked like he was an ascending player, but his week 1 performance was also terrible. Let's hope that it was just a little rust, and moving from a gap scheme to a zone scheme could also be having an impact on these players. Dylan Parham had a few plays last week where he was getting pushed back into the quarterback, but he honestly might have been the best performing Raiders lineman in week 1. He moved from left guard to right guard where he played in college, and that seems to have helped him. I actually thought Minshew played okay in week 1 despite of his offensive line. He isn't a great quarterback by any means, but he's someone that can win games if the O-line can play even at an average level. Overall, this matchup could absolutely wreck the game for the Raiders and win the game for the Ravens. The Raiders are going to need to perform much better on the interior than they did in Week 1 if they want any shot at winning this game. How the Ravens deal with Davante Adams and Brock Bowers will be another thing I'm looking at. Adams will probably see a lot of Marlon Humphrey and Bowers will probably see a lot of Kyle Hamilton. Marlon Humphrey has always been really impressive to me among all the star corners in the league because how often the Ravens play man-to-man coverage without giving their corners much help. He played in the slot a lot throughout his career, but now rotates in that spot with Hamilton and Ardarius Washington. Adams has historically had a lot of success against man coverage, and it didn't look like he was showing any signs of regression in Week 1 against the Chargers. Kyle Hamilton is one of my favorite players in the league. To me, he's the best safety in the NFL. He's just so versatile. He's great in man coverage, which is why they're so confident playing him in the slot. He's great in zone. He's probably the best blitzer among all safeties in the NFL. I mean, he can truly just do everything. With that being said, he's going to have his hands full covering Brock Bowers. Bowers looked like the real deal in Week 1, and I'm excited to watch him get more opportunities in Week 2. Let's flip over to the Ravens offense and the Raiders defense. This side of the ball is absolutely going to be a battle of the trenches. I mean, the running game, pass protection, Lamar's ability to escape, the Raiders' ability to tackle Derrick Henry, these things are all huge in this matchup. Let's start with Lamar Jackson. In my opinion, he is absolutely a top 5 quarterback in this league. On Thursday against the Chiefs, it really looked like he was making a play on every single down towards the end of that game. Yeah, he has the ability to take off and run, but his ability to just avoid pressure and move himself to where he can get a throw off was on full display, and it was beautiful to watch. I don't know if that game is even close if they don't have Lamar back there at quarterback. It will be important for the Raiders to contain him and get pressure up the middle so that he can't step up either. Ronnie Stanley looked probably the best he has since his injury against the Chiefs on Thursday night. And Tyler Linderbaum is one of the best centers in the NFL. Outside of that though, it does get a little scary for the Ravens offensive line. Derrick Henry didn't get a ton of opportunities in Week 1, and it seems like the Ravens are going to try to keep him fresh all year, which isn't necessarily the worst idea, but it does limit the impact he can make since he isn't on the field as much. Henry is a top 5 running back in the NFL and is probably the hardest guy to tackle when he gets moving. Being with Lamar Jackson only ups his stock, since Lamar is always a threat to take off and run. I also wanted to give a shout out to Isaiah Likely as well. He had a great performance in Week 1. He and Mark Andrews form one of the best tight end duos in the league and will be really tough to stop. I know I don't talk about all of the players in these previews as I try to stick with what I think are the key matchups, but I had to give Likely his flowers after that Week 1 performance. Let's flip over to the Raiders' front 7. Starting with the linebackers, they were night and day. Robert Spillane continued on his solid 2023 season with a really good performance in Week 1, especially against the run. He was frequently making plays at the line of scrimmage in the backfield and continues to keep getting better every season, which is great to see. Divine Diablo was the complete opposite. He couldn't fit a run to save his life and cost the Raiders points when he missed a run fit on a Chargers touchdown. Diablo has been with the Raiders since Patrick Graham got here, so it's concerning that he still doesn't have a grasp on what he needs to be in the defense. He was a player many had high hopes for, but it doesn't really look like he's going to hit that ceiling that I thought he had. As we all know, Malcolm Koonce went down with an injury right before Week 1, and Tyree Wilson got hurt early in the Chargers game. The injury report isn't out yet, but it seems unlikely that Wilson will be able to play against the Ravens. The Raiders signed Kayvon Chaisson, who is hopefully in shape because at this point, the Raiders just need a body at the defensive end position opposite Maxx Crosby. Speaking of Crosby, he had a somewhat quiet game in Week 1, although he did finish with 5 pressures, 1 sack, and 1 tackle for loss. His sack and tackle for loss came on the very first drive though. I would look for Crosby to have a lot of success against Pat McCarry in this game. Crosby is looking to build off the best year of his career last season where he had 14.5 sacks. He also led the league in pressures over the last 3 years by a pretty solid margin. Christian Wilkins showed why the Raiders paid him $100 million. He was frequently making plays in the run game and showed his ability to push the pocket. He's coming off his best season in terms of sacks and pressures and didn't show any signs of slowing down in week 1. Adam Butler was a name we kept hearing was having a really solid training camp, and he absolutely showed that in week 1. Whether it was the run or pass game, it seemed like he was always making plays around the ball. The Ravens are extremely weak at their guard positions, and Adam Butler and Christian Wilkins could wreck the game if the Ravens don't have a good plan for them. Coaching in the NFL is extremely important, so let's briefly touch on both of these head coaches. Antonio Pierce made some shaky decisions in his first game as head coach, and it worries me that there may be too many voices in his ear with a large coaching staff. It is early though, and he has a lot of time to learn on the job. While John Harbaugh has been coach of the Ravens for 17 years and has an impressive 11 playoff appearances and a Super Bowl victory. Luke Getsy is a wide zone play action guy, while Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken has more of a modern pro spread offense. Raiders defensive coordinator Patrick Graham runs a disguise heavy zone scheme with multiple fronts. Zachary Orr runs more of a blitz heavy man scheme that you previously saw with Mike McDonald. These coaches are extremely different, and it's fair to say that outside of Patrick Graham, the Raiders coaching staff's pretty outmatched. Let me know your predictions in the comments. Both of these teams desperately need a win after starting 0-1, which is going to make this game interesting. I think it'll be a low scoring game, and whichever team can just make that one play down the stretch will take the victory. Thanks for watching the video. Again, don't forget to comment your predictions and key matchups for the game. I'll see you in the next one.